that's actually what's creating the problem here today, is the history,
right,
not the present moment. So, it was a big question. What was that like? It was
absolutely. Now, that's a beautiful story, and what I'm trying to help our listeners understand, and myself, I guess, is what helped you in the transition, or what made you decide to go down the route of focusing on healing and energy psychology and healing individuals?
That very experience. That very experience was the beginning of it. I happened to be in relationship with this young man whose mother was a science of mind practitioner, and so she was also his secretary, and that experience of meeting those people and having a personal experience of healing in a very unconventional way for our culture was what opened my eyes, and that began a life of study. I said, there are so many things we do not learn in mainstream here, and I want to know about it. I mean, my appetite was stimulated by that. Maybe I had a natural propensity for it in the beginning, but because I'd always been a very spiritual kid, even when my family wasn't. I was the one that's saying, "Are we going to church today?" And they're, "Nah." It's like, I don't know where that came from. I was just born that way, but.
So, what's your view on pharmaceutical medicine and the current Western medical practice in comparison to your particular experiences? I mean, what are your views?
Well, I think that there. I think it's important to look at the mindset and how it's used and how it's seen and held culturally, more so than how I feel about any particular practice. I think there's a lot of practices that are unnecessary. I feel there are invasive practices, and I feel that the view of having that be the dominant, and in many people's mind, the only way to go is the problem. To me, the word holistic means that you look at anything and everything that could be the most appropriate approach for something. If I'm in an accident, I'm not going to go to a homeopath if my arm got severed from my body.
Absolutely.
So there's definitely a place for the surgery, and depending on certain things. I mean, there's case after case. If you look at name's gone right out of my head. He did wonderful early research and work with a lot of people on healing cancer through visualization and psychotherapy. Dr. Carl Simonton. He's got so many cases of people being able to work with those similar techniques that I use in healing their cancer, and yet, and it's not to say that I believe that there's no place for surgery or drugs in that process, but to think that that is what's going to heal us, because to me, we are not healed. We may have a symptom temporarily taken care of by conventional therapies or drugs or surgeries, but it doesn't mean that we've had a healing of the source or the cause of that imbalance in our whole beingness, which that was a manifestation of in the first place. Therefore, most of the time, we're going to either re-manifest the same thing or develop something else because we didn't have a shift in our energy field, in our thinking, in our self-view, or our view of the world or life.
I'm going to bring in Konstantin Pavlidis. Konstantin is a research scientist. He's a movement artist and a spiritual teacher. Konstantin, what is healing in your, according to you?
Well, Harun, I inherited a healing tradition from my mother's lineage, which is from the south of Russia and Georgia. And I remember the very first thing she always spoke about was that there's no disease within that cannot be tuned into and balanced concept of being ill has to do with basically not being in tune with some part of yourself. So there's an area of our existence that, by and large, we are not aware of as a result of our thoughts, our emotions, our physical body, and our intuition. We have a strong awareness and focus of something that we call the observer. And when these are not aligned and not communicating with each other, they all have a very specific effect, and the lack of communication and awareness of each of these faculties is a state of imbalance leading to a disorder, and that's where either a pathogen from outside of the body or from within the body can begin to sow a seed and throw things out of balance. Obviously, there are many other factors today which didn't exist in the past. Additives to foods, electromagnetic frequencies from many sources, including computers, etc., all of which create an overall state of disruption and disharmony to our system. And this creates a state of panic. And this also can put the entire system into a dis-ease. So healing has, for me, much more to do with understanding source of balance and trying to re-harmonize ourselves than looking for something that has happened from outside of ourselves and basically saying that that's the cause, whether it is just a pathogen, a bacteria or virus, whether it is external radiation from a particular source, etc. So I would agree a lot with what Lindsay was saying regarding being in tune with your thoughts, with your emotions, and also, of course, with the physical body, and having an overall sense of awareness and being, as a result of this awareness, being far more in tune with how to have a handle on what your overall system really is about.
Now, Lindsay, we've got Konstantin, we've got so many questions flooding in, and I've got so many questions I want to ask myself as well. I want to start bringing in the listeners' questions in a very short moment. I've just got a couple more questions. Lindsay, you talk about techniques, etc., but what is the practice that you do? I mean, is it energy psychology? Is it a specific type of healing?
You mean personally or in my workshops?
Yeah, yourself. I mean, what is, where did you learn your particular practices?
So it's very eclectic what I do on a daily basis. I have studied many different things that they consider holistic or metaphysical from many different sources in the U.S. I've done some studying with the Tibetan Buddhist Nyingma sect. I studied with a Native American shaman doing soul retrieval work a lot, and I studied the energy psychology, which the EFT I think is one of an extraordinary, very contemporary. I'm sure in history there are versions of that. I know out of Korea they do a lot of, not the tapping of the meridian points, but they do a lot of manipulating with their fingers, which is what these tapping processes are that I teach, because they're easy for people to learn, and in a couple of 2 or 3 days, in the workshops that I do. But I use that a lot myself still, as well as the various forms of meditation, and it's very eclectic to say what I do on a daily basis. I pull out of my bag of eclectic studies whatever I feel I need to use today. But of course, silent meditation is silent meditation. I do the crawling or tuning into the oneness diksha, the frequency of oneness that through Aman Bhagavan in India, outside of Chennai, there's a place called the Oneness University, and it's not what one would typically think of as a university, but in essence, the technique that's passed on there is tuning into a particular frequency that brings about